So I woke up this morning thinking about love.
Lovely.
I read this devotional called Daily Light. Funnily enough, you can't get it anymore. But the title of this morning is Walk in Love. And as we always do, we want to find out the first mention of that word is Hatov. And it's in Genesis 22, verse 2. And interestingly, the first mention of love is linked with a test, specifically with Abraham giving up or giving over his only son to releasing him into the hands of sacred purpose.
I love that. It's this idea of elevating your deepest attachments towards a sacred purpose. And that's exactly what we studied this out. And we realized that this passage is really more about Abraham than Isaac. And just as his name changes from Abram to Abraham, Abram means exalted father. Abraham means father of a multitude. And this transition here, it's really a physical outworking of the idea represented in his name change. And we stated before that exalted father is about him, but father of a multitude is about the multitude. It's empowering his fatherness. And I think this name change is a great visual imagery as to the progression of the idea of father in the life of Abram, transitioning into Abraham, and his whole life story, the narrative of the text, the struggles he goes through during this transition is a real insight into the ingredients, the process, the fire, if you think in terms of cooking, the fire to break down any barriers, to mix those ingredients together on a cellular level where the heat is going to break down the boundaries of flavour and create a dish. This is a great transition. And we see this through the life of Abraham.
Yeah, and I think what you said there with this realization that in Genesis 22 it's a test and it's embodying the transition of the name in very practical ways in this final act, because Isaac hasn't got a wife yet. He is the only son of promise, and when you've got an only thing that is very valuable and carries a lot of potential, you protect it. And the danger is that we imprison those things. And the challenge in Genesis 22 is the release, is the letting go, in order to elevate that thing that you're protecting, that you're guarding, to fulfill its fullest purpose. And in that, you become a father of a multitude, a bigger version of father than you can ever imagine you would have been before. And I think parents go through that. We're in danger of becoming a prison for our children rather than an enabler of their true purpose. And we need to continually check that in our love for our children. But those words, that phrase you mentioned, the willingness to elevate one's deepest attachments towards a sacred purpose, reminds me of our little exploration.
The English word for love, really, it's a bit difficult because it encompasses so much.
Yes, it does encompass a lot of ideas within that word. I can love chocolate or I can love my child.
It's quite limited, isn't it?
Yes, but I think it's really interesting to delve into the ancient idea behind love. And it really is an attitude expressed through deeds. It reminds me of some words of Yeshua, who said, if you love me, you would do my commandments. You'll actually walk this out. And that echoes the way that love is described in Deuteronomy. The command to love God is virtually synonymous with keeping his commandments and actually demonstrating unwavering fidelity.
What do you mean by that, unwavering fidelity?
Really, I mean fidelity in terms of accuracy.
Oh, interesting.
From the ancient way of seeing love, especially in the political language of the ancient Near East, specifically really in what Deuteronomy seems to be representing, a Caesarean Vassal treaty. Love was a technical term, and it describes this kind of actual practical obedience to the sovereign king over them. And in those times, when a king conquered a people, there was often a covenant, and the covenant often outlined the need for faithful loyalty to the observance of the specific commandments. that king required.
Okay, so in a way, it's making sure that the loyalty is going to remain undivided.
Yeah, to the new situation the people may find themselves in, with a new king over them and a new culture over them. It may be a king that conquers the people, but the culture of that kingdom is going to now be top-down imposed on the people that have been conquered.
I mean, that makes sense. Wow. When we really immerse into the historical backdrop of what we're reading about here within the context of love, it's really, really useful. Yeah.
It is useful. It is useful. And if you think about it in terms of the love for the people of Israel, love from God's perspective, promises within love that he makes to the fathers are within this context, not just feelings. And that's why we see, which is to our advantage, standing here right now, we see the perpetuality of God's faithfulness actually being anchored in the love. And remember, we are anchoring our concept of love in this biblical vision of what love means.
Yeah, and that kind of highlights the challenge in Genesis 22, really, because it's antithetical is the word that came to mind, completely contrary, even incompatible with the idea of him loving his son. It's like, what are you talking about? I have practical responsibility of love for my son, and you're telling me to go and end his life. This challenge reveals the cost of love. And I think in there we find the deeper challenge. This is more than difficult. This is what love means, Abraham. And this test was about enabling the fullness of Abraham's love for his son. I mean, just let that sink in. I've talked about this before. Maybe was Abraham being a little bit too possessive of this precious Isaac, his son, especially after considering all he's been through.
Wow. God's wisdom is so much higher, isn't it? He's maybe challenging Abraham, as you said, to break open his love, to multiply his fatherhood. Exalted father becomes father of a multitude. This is where multiplication happens.
I mean, there's so many dynamics in that we could look into, but I just thought that was so important. As you were saying, I'll let you carry on.
So we talked a little bit about, as we said, love isn't just a feeling. It requires you to do, and do springs forth from an intention. And this is where we started to talk about the words of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. That's Deuteronomy 6 verse 4. So Deuteronomy 6 verse 5 then continues into the Levevcha, which is called the Levevcha, and you shall love. And then it describes that love with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might. And it starts with heart. Now in the Hebrew, that word is Levevcha. And it's a little bit weird, a weird type of spelling for that, because usually it would be, like normally it would be Livka, your heart. Lev is the word for heart, Cha is the you part of that, your part of that, your heart. But it's Levevcha. There's two baits in that.
You mean the letter bait?
Yeah, there's two letters bait in that word, where usually there'd be just one. And there's a commentary in the Talmud, which I thought was very wise. You must love the divine, the Lord your God, with both of your hearts. Your Yetzer Hatov and your Yetzer Hara.
Oh, you'll have to interpret those words.
Yes, in English, we translate that as Yetzer Hatov, the inclination for good, and Yetzer Ra is the inclination for evil. And it's actually used in Genesis 6 verse 5 to describe the inclination, the Yetzer of everyone's heart was only evil, continually. And we're going to go on to speak of some Jungian ideas here afterwards, but I just want to interject here that I think this represents a very early stage of human development where we have this kind of primal urge, which Jung calls the id. And it's a core drive, it's a core drive that then goes through the transformation process as we grow older. The ego comes in, then the superego. We'll talk about that maybe. But it seems in Genesis 6 verse 5 that this was such a danger to the good, the Tov, the purposes of God for creation, that he had to wipe everything out at that moment. He preserved a core few people, but a bit like a cancer, I suppose, he had to take out the lump, do some chemotherapy on humanity, and this would give a chance again for the seed of Tov to grow and flourish. It's like the seed was swamped by, thinking of the parable of the sower, swamped by the weeds, swamped by the thorns, by the hard path. It had no chance. God needed to cultivate the soil for the opportunity of the good seed to grow and perpetuate and become. Even 30-fold is good enough. 70-fold, 100-fold, that's what we're aiming for.
That's right. Let's celebrate when there's only 30 or 70-fold. Let's not get fixated too much on the 100. Of course, that's what you want, but yeah, really good reminder.
So going back to the Talmud, you must love God, you must love the divine with both of your hearts. The Yetzer, Hatov, the good, the inclination, that heart that has the potential for the Tov that God wants to perpetuate, and the Yetzer Hara, the primal, kind of the, as we said, the id, this selfish, it can become selfish, evil inclination. And we had a little discussion, didn't we, about the difficulty into the depths of that statement.
Yeah, I have a hard time from a backdrop of, well, the specific culture that I've grown up in, that where we almost beat those things out of us. We call them bad, we repent. Often on the backdrop of fear of hellfire. You better not do that anymore.
Yeah, I'm getting the sense that is actually, in my experience, in my observation, has largely positive outcomes.
Yeah, I suppose the idea of spare the rod, spoil the child, yeah.
But in terms of what we're speaking here, especially when we merge the rabbinic thought with the Jungian ideas, often you are left with an unintegrated monster that you have to spend an enormous amount of energy keeping locked in a dungeon far away from your normal life, you know.
Yeah, that's a great image, actually. And we can see that, this is why I believe some of the, this is my conjecture here, that some of the big evangelical churches in America, the big scandals that you see happening, there's many other dynamics, but one dynamic I'm thinking about within that is that because of the culture of you can't say what your deepest monsters are locked in those closets, they are going to become almost supernaturally powerful as they try to make their presence known.
Yeah, they're not going to just die, are they? They're not just going to sit there and be good, are they?
No, they are going to be rattling cages in the depths of your psychology. And they're going to be screaming and they're going to be roaring. And sometimes it's only you that can hear that.
Yeah, if you think about it, below the conscious mind, the subconscious is hearing that roar. The subconscious is feeling that rattle. And this is why I believe there's a lot of wisdom in the Jungian. Well, he has a threefold process that we might talk about. Time is always the problem here. But one of the steps of the process is dream journaling and being real with what your dreams actually bring up.
Yeah, some of our dreams are extremely difficult you can't share them. I mean, sometimes. But the Jungian idea is that these are these unconscious shadows emerging from the cages as the conscious mind, which, funnily enough, the conscious mind is really a mechanism of imprisonment for these shadows if we're not. And this is the whole thing about Jungian psychology, which we're just starting to dive into because of the biblical, rabbinical wisdom within the Torah, within the Hebrew. It really aligns, and this is why we're counting Jung as a very important voice into this. When you're asleep, that prison disappears. The conscious mind is gone, and the unconscious can come up. And the third step in his practice actually is to consciously do that in a process that he calls imagination, where you purposely induce the state of a waking dream and you initiate a conversation with those inner figures that arise from the prison that your conscious mind often puts them in. And you ask them the question, who are you? What do you want? Those things are hidden drives, and we lock them away. But, similar to the IFS therapy I'm going through at the moment, these parts within you, we're made up of a multiplicity of different parts who are employed to preserve you, to look after you, to keep you alive, psychologically and even physically sometimes. They're doing a job, and yet they are largely unintegrated if you are presenting with life issues, stuck things that keep happening. And that's the beauty of IFS, is that it really merges this idea, this Jungian idea of talking with the monsters, finding out who they are, talking with them in curiosity, in, I was going to say love, where they feel safe to say what's really going on. The prison of the conscious mind isn't going to start locking them up again as they start expressing.
Yes, and I think within that, the mind of the ancient Near Eastern way of understanding love with a Vassal treaty, when you say embrace them in love, it's like allow their kingdom just for a moment to become a reality, in that moment of love, talking with that inner person. This is just the way I'm interpreting, and not all the way. I don't think it's appropriate to say that, but be in their kingdom for a little bit. Understand their mind and go with them in thought, not in deed, but go with their logical framework. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. Let me just reiterate and see if I'm right here. So you're saying, just as a king made a treaty, the way of the kingdom that was now over them, that is going to look very different, maybe jarring, foreign to you. You're saying with these shadow cells, when you have a conversation with them, when they've been released from that prison, you allow them to be king for that moment.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying is...
I think where I was getting stuck is that what does it look like for you to then, loving means obeying the commandments, doing the stuff. What does that mean by, obviously you're not going to be doing the stuff?
Yes, this is where my kind of parallel, my metaphor kind of breaks down. It's not actually doing it, but it's being in a willing recipient state to receive the mindset, the mind map of that kingdom, in order for you to really understand it and give a bit of devotion to not hating that part. And this is where we also come into ancient ideas of love and hate. Hate, simply, there's more to it, but let's just continue on the trajectory of our conversation here, saying that hatred is the opposite of what we see loving is in terms of this treaty backdrop, is that you are going against the ways that this king is trying to bring in. So there's this opposition, there's this against. And this is what I think I'm speaking into in terms of coming back to your background as a Christian. Yes, it's great. But the integration is very weak within that. And I think integration is the most powerful thing, because it weaves back into the fabric of your intention. And I think with the Deuteronomy, we're talking about the idea of choose life, but if you don't choose life, you have exile. But in exile, a circumcision of the heart is going to happen. Yes, God is saying to the people of Israel, circumcise your heart. But if you're not able to do that, either way, it's a painful process, and we can consciously choose to circumcise our hearts, or we can go into exile, and it happens for us through experience. And I argue, and I've argued this before, that this is a deeper process and a more sustained process. It's more of a rock-solid process because it comes through experience. But either way, there's this idea of integration, and actually talking about the circumcision pain within integration. Cutting away something that is blocking your fruitfulness is something we don't consciously want to do often.
Yeah, it's difficult to go to these places, but when we realize they're blocking our fruitfulness, a bit like coming back to Abraham, something about him, what he was doing, as I conjectured here, locking his son in a prison of cotton wool, was actually restricting the fruitfulness in terms of empowering Abraham's fatherhood to become a father of a multitude. And it's not an accident that we see after this chapter, like literally the next chapter, we see Isaac finding a wife and Abraham really going to town on making sure that the right wife is brought to Isaac. And we see Rivka, and the story continues from there. The multiplication begins.
I think that's a great parallel. Absolutely. Do you know what? I'd never seen that before. I've never likened chapter 22 as this kind of circumcision of Abraham's fatherhood. Exalted father becomes the father of a multitude as he lets go of his son. And maybe this is Midrashic talk.
Yeah, Midrashic talk is very useful. It says, what if? And then it starts telling a story of the what if in order to teach something we're seeing.
Yeah, what if Abraham was so scared to let his perfect son be tainted by any of the women around because the Canaanites were terrible. But also, he knows that the place of his fathers isn't so good either. We have Laban hanging around there with the phrase, can anything good come from Nazareth? You know, there's kind of no hope backdrop. Maybe this speaks into our parable of the sower analogy with the 30-fold, 70-fold, 100-fold. Maybe what you're seeing there is maybe Abraham had a perfectionist mindset.
Yeah, that's... There's a lot to think about, isn't it? But we digress. We've got a few things we need to say and time is moving on, so we need to move on.